It's been over 40 days since Cr1tikal's uploaded a video challenging players to complete the hardest challenge in all of Halo history without dying a single time. Halo 2 Legendary All Skulls On without envy. And finally, for the first time in 18 years, someone actually managed to pull off what was thought as the impossible. But the journey to get to the end of Halo 2 in this mode is unlike anything the Halo community has ever seen before. June 24th, 2022, Cr1tikal, aka Penguin Zero, uploaded a video proposing a $5,000 bounty for anyone who could complete this challenge, pointing out that while individual levels had been done deathless before, no player had ever been able to do a full Halo 2 LASO run with the updated 343 rule set, meaning no use of the Envy Skull, in the entire history of Halo 2. This opened the floodgates to hundreds, maybe thousands of players jumping on stream and attempting to complete this brutal challenge. We actually ended up making a video earlier this month where we looked at Halo 2 LASO and broke down not only what makes this mode harder than a regular legendary run, as the inclusion of 14 different modifiers called skulls make the game significantly harder, but also the brutality of what it would actually take for someone to be able to pull off this run, and what type of player could maybe have the potential of doing something this challenging. But I don't think anyone expected the journey of this challenge to end up going the way that it actually did. After a few weeks of many players trying, failing, and giving up, and some players pushing through and doubling down on the grind, nobody had been able to complete the challenge, so Cr1tikal ended up upping the bounty to $20,000 for anyone who could complete Halo 2 LASO deathless, putting the stakes higher than ever before. And it was around this time that buzz around this challenge really started to heat up. While at first many people saw this challenge as a competition to be the very first, the overall ferociousness of this challenge and seemingly impossibility of a completion definitely wore away at the competitive nature of this challenge, and things quickly grew into a more collaborative effort from the overall Halo community to even see if something like this could even be accomplished theoretically. While there were a lot of great streamers and players practicing, making progress, and sharing tips and tricks to get through some of the levels, seriously, Cairo Station was no joke, slowly more and more players were making progress and managing to get through some of the early levels. Though with how difficult this challenge was, it seemed like the collective Halo community agreed that if there was a chance of anyone even getting remotely close to having the skill set required to do a single deathless run on the hardest mode ever, it would have to be Jervalin.
Oh! 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 Ah! Stop it! Oh!
Sure, along the way we would see some other great Halo players come out of the woodworks making some major progress, and in some cases, even brand new players were proving that with enough practice, deep runs could be made by anyone. Overall, it still seemed like most players, though, were rooting for Jervalin to be the player, to be the first player to take this run to the end. Literally for over a month, Jervalin streamed every single day, at least 6 hours a day, but oftentimes he had streams running into the 11s or 12 hours marks where he would run this challenge over and over again. Sometimes he'd make some deep runs, and other times, well, LASO would show its true colors.
No, you fucking damn it! God fucking damn it, I hate this game!
Brutes! The faster you can kill those brutes, the better.
Despite the fact that this challenge seemed unobtainable to many different players, Jervalin did have a pretty impressive record of accomplishments in Halo challenge runs. Still, as more people discovered this challenge, level 10 of 13, Gravemind, quickly became a massive talking point in the community of players who were tuning in each night, which would remain Jervalin's personal best distance he was able to make deathless before his runs would tragically come to an end. Throughout the course of this challenge, Jervalin had managed to make it to Gravemind 12 different times, each time having a promising run that could show potential for a possible victory, and each time Gravemind's strong enemies, intense RNG, and exceedingly long level length would snub out any chances Jervalin would have to make it to the end game of Halo 2. However, Jervalin is not at all the type of person to give up easily on something like this. It didn't matter how many attempts it would take, Jervalin was determined to finish this challenge no matter what. Honestly, I thoroughly look forward to watching Jervalin's daily attempts. They were not only incredibly insightful to watch, but also Jervalin seemed like a pretty nice guy, and during the process of covering this run, we managed to become pretty good friends.
So I assume you enjoy country music. Don't make me ban you, Elijah. But that banjo-kazooie bullshit drives me fucking crazy, okay? I'm gonna, like, freak out. I'm gonna have a meltdown, okay? Just stop it. Because every time Rocket Sloth says bald, like, I'm gonna blow up, dude. My brain is just, like, on fire. I should buy a mansion? Oh yeah, 20,000 is gonna buy me a mansion, Rocket Sloth, that's for sure. Who is that, Elijah being a fucking ball sack already? 5 minutes into the stream and he's LOLing me?
As more time passed on, a lot more players were managing to make some deeper runs in Halo 2 as well in this challenge. Frazier, a player with no deep Halo 2 experience prior, managed to get a run all the way into Sacred Icon, which was level 8 of 13. Pedro Gas made it to Quarantine Zone, which was level 9 out of 10, and another player, Sinister, managed to have a god run where he made it to Gravemind, level 10 of 13, and died in the very first room. There were other great players as well grinding away at Halo 2, and as more talks about this challenge maybe actually being viable, more and more viewership came, and suddenly there were more eyes than ever on these runners who were still digging their heels in trying to learn these strategies and apply them with their own personal skill sets. But no matter how much progress any individual could make, if Gravemind could not be beaten, neither could this challenge. In our other video, we recommend you take a look if you're curious about the ins and outs of what it would take for a lasso run. We looked at a specific section of Gravemind that would likely be one of the biggest roadblocks that players would have to find a way through. That is the Gravemind prison. In this section of the 10th level of Halo 2, there's a lot of RNG that happens during the lift section of the level as Master Chief travels into the prison. Estimates range with all of the different things that can happen. The chances of actually surviving the elevator without dying initially are around 50%. And it of course depends on a lot of variables that could swing that 50-50 shot either up or down as you make your way actually down the lift, but there's a lot of enemies just chilling there ready to strike. Jervalin ended up dying multiple times before he could even get off the lift itself in some of his Gravemind runs, and then in the handful of times that he did manage to survive the elevator alone, the prison part itself isn't necessarily a cakewalk either. There are a lot of enemies and a lot of open areas where enemies can tag you from a range. Out of all 12 Gravemind attempts, Jervalin made it to the prison and out of it again just one single time, when an extra wave of buggers in the room following prison trapped him in a bad spot, ending his run. This prison was a serious problem. However, years ago, speedrunner Mr. Monopoly did discover that there is a way you can bypass prison by luring a brute into the elevator and punch canceling with the brute above you to gain enough upwards momentum after hitting a loading zone to reverse the elevator and make your way up to the section after the prison, thus bypassing the entire prison part of the level. The problem is with Lasso and all of these skulls that are on, the unpredictability of the brutes in the elevator room made this trick virtually impossible, as this trick mostly was only used in instances where you could use a checkpoint and revert to the last checkpoint if you failed the prison skip, and the chances of having a brute do exactly what you needed to do wasn't very replicatable on a consistent basis, meaning you could try to set up the perfect elevator skip and maybe one time out of 100 attempts would you actually get it. On a live run where you can't revert and you can't die, a 1% chance of having the brutes do what you need them to do really wasn't a viable option for a run. So taking the 50-50 chance on the prison made a lot more sense. Now earlier on in this video, I mentioned that this challenge very quickly became a collaborative effort amongst runners more so than a competitive race over who would beat the game first. And this collaborative nature ended up playing a pretty big role during the next few days. You see, there were 2 runners during this challenge that had spent quite a bit of time learning the deeper meta of LASO and ended up making a discovery that would change LASO running forever.
And go up there and you jump in and he comes on top of you.
Streamer Cr1tikal's and Fraser both started streaming for the first time when this challenge started and used Jervalin's streams and routes early on to adopt strategies and routes for making their own LASO runs. These guys were on the grind, and after they both had runs to about the early mid game, some of the times during their streams, they would begin practicing levels that they hadn't gotten to in case they did have a run where they made it pretty far. I think I can speak for a lot of people who may have underestimated the newer players jumping into Halo because of this challenge, but these guys put hours into the grind and should be respected for how good they managed to get without having a deep history of playing the game. On August 1st, 2022, Cr1tikal's was streaming and decided to take some time to map out the hardest level, Gravemind, and since Cr1tikal's was playing on the Master Chief Collection version of the game, not original hardware, the MCC version of the game runs at 60 Hz per second, meaning in some cases enemies can actually shoot faster than the OG version of the game, which makes surviving the prison elevator even harder because enemies can now shoot Master Chief at a faster fire rate. So of course, knowing that there is a prison skip, Cr1tikal's decided to maybe see if he could mess around with the sandbox and the area and try to get a solution to maybe consistently get a brute lineup that, if maybe perhaps everything lined up in the stars, he could pull off a prison skip first try. While typically in a regular Halo 2 legendary speedrun, players utilize this brute with a plasma rifle and a good checkpoint and will roll the elevator multiple times since there are no skulls on and they're allowed to revert to last checkpoint to try to get the brute to line up correctly so that they can do the elevator skip and butterfly back up the lift. While Cuddly was messing around in this area, he noticed that if you push up on a different brute in the same room, the one with the brute shot, he will aggro depending on what weapon you're holding, meaning you could cause the brute to be forced into this little melee type dance. And over the next few hours, Cuddly was able to consistently get the brute angry walking around the elevator, but couldn't consistently get the brute to actually follow him down the lift. No matter what he did, he couldn't get the brute to follow him on this regular basis, and when the brute did happen to actually drop down the elevator, the skip could work, but it still wasn't consistent enough to be viable for an actual run. And just randomly, Fraser, who also was a newcomer to streaming Halo 2 LASO, was in the chat and was just like, hey, why not use some grenades? And after a little bit of testing, Fraser was absolutely right about this. If you line up a brute just right in the corner and throw a sticky grenade over his head so he doesn't quite see it and won't dodge out of the way, the push of the grenade can be just enough to drop the brute in the elevator right after you drop in. The next few hours of the stream were pretty much just Cuddly running the trick over and over and trying to explain how it worked and how this could possibly be a really big deal.
So, I know. We jump over to the left, wait for the jackal to show up. I like to kill the one on the right, as that's just what works for me. You come down here, you check your toes. There's 3 different configurations. I see one toe though, and I stick it. He's being a little aggressive, but it's fine. And when we're on this side near 12 o'clock, we wanna stay close to him so he doesn't path around. You line it up with his head, your cursor. Oh god, this is a bad angle. It's probably not gonna work, but it's fine. You throw the grenade up so he doesn't get scared. You have the brute shot out, you look at the weapon crate, you see him, you shoot, you switch, you crouch a little bit so he doesn't jump off of you on the checkpoint. You get the button combo after the checkpoint. And you're good, you're golden.
Cuddly and Fraser quickly pass this info over to Jervalin in hopes to help him maybe discover and adapt a new strategy that works best for him. And that night, Jervalin began testing out the viability of this method and worked to polish his approach to match his own playstyle. Sure enough, this trick had the potential to be viable even in OG Halo 2 and was a setup combo that no one had ever thought of, but could be a massive game changer.
Oh my God. This is actually gonna fucking work.
Now, it's worth noting that Jervalin had survived prison before on a live run, and would have likely had more runs fighting through the prison in the future, but being able to remove the RNG part of the level and the run could help significantly reduce the time it could take Jervalin to maybe have a late game run. And while it was getting really late on stream, Jervalin decided this discovery was such a big deal, he had to try at least one more run that night. Jervalin having the most experience running Lasso, and with him running for so many hours, Jervalin had really improved his time to complete levels here. Within 40 minutes, he had already cleared Cairo Station, Outskirts, and Metropolis, and was going into Arbiter, and by an hour and 20 minutes, he was already reaching the end section of level 5, Oracle. But then, despite having full overshields, he randomly got lit up by 2 heretic elites, killing his run.
No. Oh my!
It was late, and this was heartbreaking knowing that he was getting so close with this new strategy, and that all the practice and routing that he did for this challenge could pay off, as Jervalin was feeling confident in his abilities for a late game run if he could just get past Gravemind. The situation was frustrating, but he decided he would practice a bit more and then wrap up the stream. Now, of course, while this trick discovery was a big deal, this discovery wouldn't have made any difference if there wasn't actually a player who had the skill set and capacity to have a run make it to the prison in the first place. And even then, if anyone could get this new prison skip done in a real world scenario, they would still have to clutch the very challenging back half of Gravemind and the following 3 levels. And while the prison skip was a big optimization in the big picture of the overall run, it was just a drop in the bucket when compared to the long list of tricks and know-how and strategies that a viable runner has to be knowledgeable and has to be able to think about while doing a real run. The next day, Jervalin came home from work and streamed for 11 hours, and for the life of him, could not get a run started. It seemed like he was just constantly plagued with bad luck in Halo 2. There were random early deaths, bad RNG on regret, and then randomly his stream kept crashing. It was discouraging to say the least. And Jervalin and his viewers knew he had what it took to pull this off, but he just needed to have that one run that could finally get to Gravemind, as he'd done 12 other times, and then maybe there was actually a chance.
Alright, chat. Tomorrow. This is the last opportunity they're getting, chat. After this, after tomorrow, you might as well wrap it up.
The next day, Jervalin started early and the hype was real. Maybe Jervalin actually getting an hour or 2 of sleep was all he needed to dive into this challenge with a ton of confidence. And while maybe the last day wasn't necessarily that reassuring, I think Jervalin knew that he was a whole lot closer than maybe it looked. And I think a lot of his viewers were beginning to believe that as well. He started off his stream with his usual warm-up and began practicing 2 major parts of the late game. Starting off, he practiced the new elevator skip a few times and then moved on to the tricky flood butterfly, which is a trick that is on the level High Charity, which is level 12 out of 13. Now, we've heard Jervalin talk about this trick before, and the fact that he was practicing it up shows that he knew there was a chance he could have his furthest run yet very soon.
Performing High Charity skip takes a long time. 50, 60, 70, 80 hours to learn how to do High Charity skip. It's not something you can just do.
Sir, that hurt.
With a little bit of practice, Jervalin was ready to start going for runs, and starting things off, Jervalin had a pretty clean start. Beginning as you should in the armory before going into Cairo, Jervalin was looking at a pretty smooth run, using glitches like ghosting to bypass a couple of early encounters, and while he had a few close calls in the large elevator room, watching Jervalin play Cairo after seeing so many others struggle through this level regularly, it's pretty impressive.
I gotta close the gap on this guy. He's probably gonna get me though, as this guy's probably gonna kill me, because he's just being a weirdo. He's probably gonna get me right here. Oh my god. Okay.
Jervalin did some cool rooftop running and a sword fly into an elite on Outskirts before using a ghost to navigate the tunnels. And to be fair, In these early levels, there isn't usually too much to worry about, as Jervalin had run them a bunch. He was getting really fast at them, so even if he did die and had to reset, it usually wasn't the end of the world. But out of the gate, Jervalin was having a pretty good run. On Metropolis, he drives around, hits some despawns, takes out enemies that usually are run enders for some players, like he literally does this like it's nothing at all. Later, he does a quick launch to get into the Scarab early, and he uses the see-through wall glitch to shoot at the drivers to end the level quickly. Arbiter was up next, and while there are a few places of things that could go badly, fortunately it was mostly smooth here, and on Oracle, for the most part, people were just hoping he didn't randomly get lasered by the 2 heretic elites like he did the day previously. Jervalin did great keeping the momentum going here, and was getting close to the end of the level, where he implemented another ghosting trick to bypass a wall. However, when he was doing the ghosting clip through the wall, something was going on weirdly with the player offset, which is a part of the glitch, and when Jervalin turned around to figure out his placement, this happened.
The hell just happened right there? Oh my! Well, that'll never happen again. That's one of those moments you'll never see, ever, anywhere else.
He somehow managed to fall into this room and then began to fall into the void, but quickly turned around and managed to land outside of the structure, saving the run. But yeah, that was really close. Delta Halo, though, was a breeze, with Master Chief moving through the out of bounds areas to hit the triggers, allowing for the level to progress. And while Regret used to be one of the absolute hardest levels for Jervalin to make progress on, Jervalin had been practicing away at many different strategies to routinely be able to move on past the early section of the level without as much risk. Jervalin right away has to preemptively kill some elites that spawn in. He has to pinpoint and shoot specific jackals from a distance before wrapping back and using marine reinforcements that he wants to keep alive for later on, and he then takes out some of the enemies up ahead. For the rest of the level, he utilizes head glitching, where you stick your head into a wall, and that makes it harder for enemies to see the player. And as long as through the rest of the level, Jervalin plays it relatively cautiously, he's usually in pretty good shape once he gets out of the first area. Later in the level, he does set up the final boss fight room to avoid extra enemies spawning in, making fighting Regret himself not as bad. Sacred Icon was a little bit interesting. Things were going smoothly at first, and fortunately, since it's an Arbiter level, even without the Envy Skull, Arbiter still has his invisibility. However, for whatever reason, it was at this point in his first run of the night that a random SMG flood shot him, decloaking him, which means every enemy in the area all of a sudden could see him.
Oh no, that's bad, chat. That's bad as f***. No, goddammit. No. No, you sack of f***. It ain't f***ing happening.
Yeah, he saved this run. He would randomly get shot again when he was sword lunging across the outside section of the level, but he did manage to pull it together and survive the end of this level as well, moving forward to Quarantine Zone. Now, Jervalin has a pretty high success rate on this level and has personally mapped out a route to hit all of the loads in the most efficient and safest way possible. Mind you, this is the final level before Gravemind, and with this level, there's a 7-minute gondola ride where Jervalin can get into a really easy glitch spot where enemies won't attack him, and he can decompress and mentally get prepared for Gravemind coming up. And just like that, Jervalin was going into Gravemind.
Alright, it is time to wash my hands. And we're in there. This is our first attempt back to Gravemind with Prison Skip. We're getting it done. Gravemind's going in the locker, chat. Like, we're feeling it. Taking the Gravemind lunch money. It's happening. It's finally gonna happen.
The level starts out and you can feel the intensity. Brutes are already shooting at Jervalin pretty much within the first frame. Jervalin spins around and goes for a Mr. Monopoly strat of punching the grunts right away, refreshing his shields and ducks into cover. He then moves back where he can put a little distance between himself and the enemies and picks things off safely and catch a despawn to fly through this first area relatively fast. He'll later also gather weapons and move up top to take out enemies. The next hallway, he manages to pull off a pretty amazing stick on a brute. After clearing outside and pushing down, there's only a few more rooms he has to clear before he reaches the lift that takes you into the prison. Now earlier we pointed out that for this to work correctly, you need to have a pretty specific setup. If something goes wrong, that's it. The entire run could end up dead. And on Jervalin's run, a lot happens in a very short amount of time here. As Jervalin moves up to backsmack enemies to get shields, this grunt randomly starts running around chaotically, and when Jervalin makes the punch to kill the grunt, Master Chief lunges maybe a split pixel too far forward, just briefly triggering the door to open. Despite the door barely opening and Master Chief hiding, this causes those jackals to scatter because they were able to spot the Master Chief.
Okay, that's not good. That's really bad. I was out of position, unfortunately. Yeah, we may not be able to hit it now. We might not be able to get it, chat.
This completely breaks the normal predictability and setup that is required to do the new form of prison skip.
One of them did. Both of the brutes are right there, though, being weird. Alright, we're not out of it just yet. We're not out of it yet. Hold on. Hold on.
Thinking on his feet, Jervalin backs up and pushes one of the weapon boxes to the door to provide extra cover, as he's going to have to take out the jackal differently than how usually practiced. Jervalin opens the door to peek and the brute immediately shoots, but the box takes the hit while Jervalin moves out of the way. This actually changes the locations of the enemies in the next room, giving Jervalin just a quick enough opportunity to kill one of the jackals, which will cause the other one to retreat, and now he at least has a chance to get into the room to try to save his run. For whatever reason, one of the brutes here was just turned around not looking, so Jervalin decided his only chance is to YOLO and run in there, going for the lower level, hoping that the brute wouldn't see him. Once he got down there, he triggered Cortana to open the lift and throw stickies at the brutes down below. Then he begins looking for the brute shot brute to try to bait him into the elevator room. The brute lunges at him as expected, and Jervalin baits him around the elevator, lining him up for the grenade drop. He lines up the grenade, throws, hits, and pushes the brute in the elevator with him on a live run. It actually worked, but then this happened.
No way!
All of a sudden, another brute from the middle level lunges into the elevator and pushes the other brute further away from Jervalin.
I got him!
There are two groups of Marines.
Let's go!
Tension lock.
Let's go!
Okay.
Fortunately, it wasn't pushed completely out of Jervalin's range, and he was able to hit the butterfly jump and climb up the elevator, successfully skipping the prison for the first time in any live run.
You neutralize the guards. Quietly.
Alright, dude!
Marines are just inside.
Alright! Okay, this is the real fucking deal now.
Excellent. Truth is brought.
Now at this point, he was tied with his best run ever, as last time he had died in the room right after prison skip. And this time, he was prepared to keep himself alive through the waves of enemies. Okay, he was surviving, but the next half of the level is no cakewalk either. There's lots of tight hallways, and then he also will have to go on later on and survive some of the outdoor sections of the level. The hunters are a bit cursed here, as they can use up a ton of grenades and ammo to kill them, and because of the weapon selection that Jervalin has to bring with him to actually be able to pull off prison skip, he doesn't have a beam rifle here, so easily taking out the hunters is a lot harder than what Jervalin typically would encounter when practicing, but he methodically uses grenades and plasma rifles to eventually kill the hunters. The outside sections Jervalin took slowly by taking out enemies from far away. For instance, these elites died, interestingly, because they were in a different load zone, which was just kind of a cool and unique way for these enemies to die. In the past, we've talked to Jervalin before, and he pointed out that in this next room, the elites are pretty intimidating.
These elites are probably the scariest elites on gravemind. The elites we're getting ready to face. They literally, they throw grenades, they don't give a fuck about what you're talking about. Like, they shoot you all the time. Like, this section right here is a big slow play.
But fortunately enough, he clears the next room without anything going completely wrong.
Let me see if I can get the little head glitch on him. Let me see if he's gonna behave. Go right to that spot, buddy. Oh my god. That is what I'm fucking talking about, buddy! Let's go, boy!
Typically, this bridge is pretty intense, but by using old-fashioned Halo 2 sword flying, Jervalin could fly right over the load zone, bypassing enemies coming in, and he can start to set up for the final firefight, which is surprisingly pretty cool. All he essentially has to do is maneuver his way past the big hunters at the end and make a break through the door and wait for 11 minutes. The game will then stop checking to see if the enemies are alive, and it allows him to trigger the end of the level. This was massive. He managed to beat the one level that had held him back for so long, and while he still had 3 levels to go, this in itself was still a massive accomplishment. But he wasn't out of the woods yet. Jervalin still had 3 more levels that he would have to survive.
There's a couple of things that could go wrong on Uprising, because the safest way to deal with the beginning of Uprising is to do a super bounce. I'm going to be doing a super bounce right at the start. I'm pretty good at it. I've done it 500 times, I don't know, a shitload. But I've fallen through the map on this super bounce one time.
Going into Uprising, he lands the super bounce and waits for the brutes to move up. He then does a tantrum jump, which is an idle animation abuse that lets you get an extra jump in when you're kind of floating on yourself to get just a little bit higher to avoid the enemies, then drops down to make his way inside. He then does a double nade jump and bam! He's actually out of bounds correctly here, and he can navigate through the mountaintop to get to the end section of the level. He drops into the building and picks out weapons to carry over to the Great Journey, but mind you, he can only bring weapons that are available on that level, so after doing that, he triggers the end, going on to High Charity, where he now has to pull off the butterfly jump. Now, typically, Jervalin is pretty relaxed during his runs, even in intense moments. You never see Jervalin getting nervous or anxious, but you could tell the pressure of how close he was may have been starting to kick in. When Jervalin starts setting up the trick, he nearly falls off but recovers it, and he sets it up again and begins flying. Things are going smoothly while he does this punch cancel butterfly jump until he gets slightly separated from the flood and things aren't looking good for a second.
Oh my god, no you f***ing don't, you little bastard, you. No. High Charity skip. Stop it, damn it. Oh my f***ing god. Game! Stop that!
I actually later asked Jervalin about this specific moment, and he said during this time he probably was a little on edge and may have been melee canceling a little bit too quickly, but when things started to go south, his instinctive reflexes kind of kicked in, and he was able to recover and fly the rest of the way to the end of High Charity. That meant he had just 1 level left, and this was just his first attempt of the day. He starts off the level strong, hitting a despawn of wraiths, and travels through the interior, avoiding the enemies he doesn't have to fight, and sneaking forward in the instances the best that he can. This bridge here is intimidating, but he hangs back and takes out the enemies at a distance, so he doesn't have any health loss, because with the Black Eye Skull active, health regeneration is weird and can cause the game to soft lock, so he has to be extra careful, and once he pushes far enough forward, he hits a load and backtracks through the level, climbing a rock to get to the end section by the scarab that should trigger a cutscene, but nothing happened. He ends up deciding to travel back through the level again and reloading the area, which then causes that cutscene to trigger. From here, he hits another deload, stopping wraiths in this level from having drivers, and flies to a glitch spot that lets you teleport into the boss fight with a vehicle if you drop at the right moment after Johnson breaks the door with the Scarab. Now, in the past, Jervalin has had runs fall apart in final boss fights, so we weren't fully out of the woods yet, but he loads in and right away things start going badly. His Banshee takes a ton of damage, but he manages to survive it okay, and he flies around making sure to take out reinforcements. He absolutely does not want to get stuck here. He moves forward and keeps consistent fire on Tartarus until...
Alright, there you go, chat.
he did it.
Gosh, dude! Fucking damn right! We did it! So there you go. All right, dude. We did it. We nailed it. We nailed it, chat.
Jervalin was the first player to ever complete the Halo 2 LASO playlists Deathless and Envyless, and between Cr1tikal's stream, Jervalin's stream, and other streamers who were watching this happen in real time, over 50,000 people watched as Jervalin accomplished the Moist Cr1tikal Halo 2 challenge and earned himself the $20,000 bounty.
Oh, feels good, man. It feels good.
But the story didn't end here just yet. No doubt, Moist Cr1tikal's Halo 2 challenge is one of the hardest Halo challenges to ever exist. But what if there was one challenge that was even harder than Moist's challenge? That theoretically could be possible, but just hadn't been done quite yet. As Jervalin has now completed the Moist Cr1tikal challenge, he's already mentioned what he is setting his eyes to next as far as Halo triumphs go. And it looks like now we may be entering a new era of Halo 2 Goliath runs. Jervalin had begun routing out the possibility of a classic Halo 2 LASO Deathless run without shooting a single shot. Not only does having to go the shootless route change the dynamics of which levels are easier and which levels are harder, but it greatly increases the difficulty. Prior of doing the Cr1tikal challenge, Jervalin had been attempting the Deathless Goliath run for 6 months and managed to make it to the final level 2 different times just to lose it all at the end. And now Jervalin has been out of practice in Goliath running and will be spending the foreseeable future rerouting, repracticing, and planning to once and for all beat the ultimate challenge that is still one step above the Cr1tikal challenge. So this is where I encourage all of you to go and follow Jervalin and tell him that Rocket Sloth sent you. We already got to witness history in the making when he beat Cr1tikal's challenge, and if you missed out, you still have a chance to watch this new journey of Jervalin's Goliath runs. And mind you, this video just serves as a very bare bones summary of the legendary run by Jervalin. If you have time, I strongly recommend watching the actual VOD because there's so much more insight and strategy and tricks that he did, or at least tune into his newer streams. This has been an incredible journey to watch, and Jervalin honestly is one of the most deserving players of this bounty reward. Not only was he doing it just for his passion of Halo 2 and love of the game, but his personality and his determination made the entire watching experience so pleasant. Moist Cr1tikal really did something amazing during a time where the Halo community was kind of at a low point after coming off of Halo Infinite, and he reignited the love for Halo, and that's something really awesome, especially with it being centered around such a timeless classic like Halo 2. While Jervalin plans on continuing on the grind with Halo 2 going for the Goliath run, Moist Cr1tikal announced that he plans on doing more challenges with bounties associated sometime in the future, which should be something really exciting to watch. And some players in the Halo community are continuing to grind away at the critical challenge, as some players just want to have the accomplishment for the glory, and there still hasn't been a player to beat the Moist Critical Challenge on the Master Chief Collection, which has a separate set of strategies that can be used. So it will be interesting to see who ends up taking the crown on that. Also, no one's done it on Halo 2 Vista, so I don't know if anyone will. Alright, if we still have you at this point in the video, maybe you could consider subscribing to our channel if you like our storytelling approach to these video game triumphs. We really want to focus in our channel on sharing these types of stories in the future. You could watch either our other Lasso video we did, or if you want an interesting story like this, the story of Cody Miller, a Halo 2 speedrunner who would get caught splicing his speedruns, went to a speedrunning event and did very badly. It's a really interesting video documentary like this, and it's definitely worth a watch. Also, if you're a fan of Rocket Sloth, maybe you've been here for a while, you could consider supporting us on Patreon. We're trying to do a fresh launch on that, and we're going to talk more about that in the future on what we plan on doing on there. But if you want to jump in early and support our channel and help us keep our content afloat, remember there's two of us grinding away at making these videos, so we're splitting everything between the two of us. So any extra support truly does go a long way. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.